introduce myself as a bird watcher and an author of bird identification and bird conservation books of Nepal, but mostly I like to think of myself as a bird conservationist with a special interest in Nepalese birds. Yeah, well, that's a good question. How I started birding? Well, my mother said that even when I was a baby, I was pointing and waving at birds. So I just was always interested. And my parents said, in fact, that I would grow out of it. That when I grew up, I would change my mind. But that never happened, of course. Well, how my interest in bird conservation evolved? Well, initially, I was interested in identifying birds, and at that time, because I was very young, a young girl, and then even teenager, and I taught myself. That was rather slow, as you can imagine. I taught myself how to identify, particularly as I didn't have any binoculars, and my grandparents gave me a pair of second-hand binoculars, and they were so bad I don't know how I saw any birds through them actually. But anyway, so bird identification, and then I developed an interest in the environment, and I was lucky to be able to do a master's degree in ecology, and that was 1970, and it was about that time that the concept of wildlife and nature conservation was really taking hold. Before that, people in the UK anyway didn't really appreciate it, didn't really understand it. So I was lucky to have that education, and that made me think about bird conservation. And gradually over time, the interest in bird conservation is, that's what I'm most interested today. Yes, it does hold a deeper meaning for me than just a scientific. I've found that if I have any problems or worries or stress, that if I just go out on my own or with somebody else who's interested in birds, that I can. I find that it brings me a lot of peace of mind. It brings me peace of mind, and I feel much better for it. A nature cure. You could call it a nature cure. Well, the places that have I love birding at home, of course, but Nepal has had its greatest impression on me, and it might have been because of when I visited here. That time of my life, I was just married. You know how it is when you're just married, and my husband Tim, he'd been here before me, so he was the reason I came. We came together, and that was his second visit, and so we'd only been married a few weeks actually, and we just had the most wonderful time, and we did a trek together then, that was 1977, up to Muktinath and from Pokhara, and it's the first time I'd seen the Himalayas and the Himalayan birds, and met the Nepali people properly then. So I just fell in love with Nepal at that time. Yeah. Well, recommended places for birding in Nepal, I recommend in the Kathmandu Valley, Shivapuri National Park, and also Pulchoki Mountain. They're very good. And also Chitwan National Park. If you have more time, and I highly recommend having more time, then I'd also recommend Bardia National Park. And there's no doubt that the lowland grasslands at Suklafand are excellent. You've got some, you know, it holds some. It holds good populations of some grassland birds that are hard to see in India, I think, like Finn's weaver, for instance. Well, I think I would like to spend more time here in Nepal, to be honest. Yeah, I'd like to spend more time here, and I would like to spend more time in the mountains. Well, as a group, owls are undoubtedly my favorite, and the bird that's most special to me is barn owl. I have barn owl close to where I live, actually. It breeds there. It's fairly common in the Weardale, the valley where I live, and of course it's also here in Nepal, breeding here. Well, I think I've thought, the most extraordinary sighting for me was when I first saw Bengal florican male displaying. I could hardly believe it, you know, leaping out of the grass and then doing that, puffing itself up like a big black and white ball, and then swooping down and then up and down again. I mean, so Tim and I did the survey in 1982, and we were lucky to see that display many times. But the first time I saw it, it's just incredible. Well, I think the biggest gap in Nepal and the rest of the Indian subcontinent, the biggest research gap is on small birds, on the smaller, you know, on the passerine birds. I think funders are, especially the species that are not recognized at the present time as being either nationally or globally threatened. And I think funders are largely to have a big responsibility here, because they tend to fund the globally threatened birds and the big birds, and what we are not, what is not being documented is what I think is happening is a decline, overall decline of many of our smaller birds. I think they need to, especially the poorer people, they need to have some benefit financially, really. Yeah. You know, not just, it's not that they don't know. You know, I think maybe as conservationists can be a bit arrogant in assuming that these local people don't know. But I think in many cases, you know, they do, but they're looking at feeding their families, aren't they? And so I suppose if it's well managed, then ecotourism, you know, would help. Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Well, the person who had the idea of writing it was the lead author of our book, Richard Grimmett. And he visited Nepal in 1982, actually. I keep telling him he should come back. Anyway, so Richard pointed out to Tim and me that there was a gap in field guides of the world. Okay, there wasn't one on birds of the Indian subcontinent, and the only reason for that is because an American ornithologist called Ben King, he was writing one. Actually, he was writing one, and because he is so eminent, and he was the author of a field guide to the birds of China, and also of Birds of the Southeast Asia, which are both classic books. And when he announced that he was writing one on birds of the Indian subcontinent, no other author would do it because Ben was doing it. However, Ben had a big argument with his artist, okay? And Richard said, Richard came to know about it, and he said, look, this book from Ben King is not coming, you know, so let's do it. And so we took the risk that Ben's book wouldn't materialize. It didn't actually. His book was never published. And and then Richard said to Tim and me, will you join me in writing this book? So it was Richard's idea. So we said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. Oh, it's very, very challenging, I can tell you. And we're now doing a second, well, the first book we published was 1998 together, and we published a number of books since then on the region. And the field guide to the whole region was published in 2011. But the biggest challenge has been the fully revised or second edition of the Field Guide to the Birds of the Indian Subcontinent. This is the book we're working on at the moment, and it's almost finished. The text was finished a year ago, actually 13 months ago, and there's been a bit of problem with the maps. But anyway, so within a year that should be out. And the difficulties there have been the large number of changes in bird names, in taxonomy. There have been many splits, and also there's quite, unlike in 2011, there wasn't much controversy then about bird names, actually, like there is today. And so we've decided to follow eBird. No, we don't always agree with eBird, but that's not the point, you know, because if we do eBird, then that's what many birders use. If we use something different, or if we use the names we like, then that'll add confusion. So that book has been, and then, yeah, all the splits. So it's now, there's 1,400 species actually, and 1,300 maps.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge, yes. Well, the first book that Tim and I wrote, actually that was Tim's idea. The first field guide, as you know, was written by the Flemings, published in 1976. And Tim said that there was nothing published on the distribution of birds in Nepal, where they occurred, you know. And so he said, shall you and I just gather, the two of us gather all the information we could on the distribution of birds in Nepal. And you know, so we did that, and we persuaded a publisher to publish it. But that was very, very ambitious undertaking at the time. And when we told our friends we were writing a book, and our family, they just thought we were a bit mad actually, because they said, my dad said, well, who is going to read it and who is going to publish it? Not very encouraging, it was. But anyway, it happened. So that's how that one happened. And I've told you how, and the Field Guide to the Birds of Nepal, then next came the big book that Richard, where we did to the whole region, and after that we did what we would call the spin-off guides, field guides, and one of those is the Birds of Nepal. It's got to be digitized. It's got to be, and also the calls need to be. We've had a struggle with the publishers there. So not only the illustration, not only the description, but you also need the sounds as well to be available. And yeah, as you said, you know, it's now massive. You see, it's grown such a lot. Who's going to carry that, you know, in their pocket? And it's also quite hard. It's going to be much easier to access, isn't it, as digitally, than going through And that's another thing that's changed, of course, is the order of species. That's been changing a lot, and that's confusing to people. Well, I think there's a challenge here on getting younger people on board. You know, we can't assume that they're going to be interested. And I think that the way we can do it is to make our book digitized, that's what appeals to most young people. I mean, I still do it actually because I'm old-fashioned, so I have my notebook and I write it all out. But young people, you can't expect people to do that. They want it. So I think you have to make it user-friendly for them. I would so much like to improve the attitude of many bird photographers, I'm afraid. I'm not just talking about Nepalese photographers that at home. Every birding community I've seen, and I think the motto is, I'm sure you've seen it, birds first. You put the bird first. That bird you're photographing, you put that bird first. But I can see it, the temptation. Always, you never get the best photo. You always want to get a better photo. You're never quite close enough. You want the bird in flight or whatever. So I would like to see and I do know many bird photographers who do have those ethics, but the majority don't, I'm afraid. Not the people I've met. Well, I think not just for the younger generation, but for all birders, I would say enjoy your bird watching. Don't let the ambition to see a new bird for the country, the best photograph, as I said, be the priority. Just watch the birds and enjoy them. If you're too busy focusing on the picture, you're not actually really enjoying watching it. I think a lot of the time you're not watching what it's doing. Or I think it's always been the case that when I'm out bird watching, I'm feeling happy and enjoying birds, enjoying nature, and I just find it uplifting, refreshing, and it makes me feel it's like invigorating for me, for my mind. Well, yes, okay. Well, I think I think the biggest challenge I've faced as a female birder is to be taken seriously, even today. And so I say to to young female birders to just believe in yourself and be your own person and just keep just keep and have confidence in yourself, really, and you have to maybe sometimes stand up to some of the men, And I never need encouragement to go birding, because if I'm feeling down, it's the birding that brings me up. What I've seen, one of the biggest threats from climate change in Nepal is the drying out of habitats, and also the changing weather. Like this winter and last winter, we've had no winter rain in most of Nepal, and so it's had this impact of drying on habitats. So I think that has to be addressed. Habitat loss is very important. That's received a lot of attention, but studies on climate change, impacts of climate change on birds. Well, I've been to Australia and New Zealand several times lucky to do that because I have family there. And in Asia, well, India, of course, and Sri Lanka, and Myanmar, and Thailand, and Malaysia, and in Africa, Madagascar, which is my favorite after Nepal, actually. Madagascar, Botswana, Gambia, where else? Gambia, Morocco, and South Africa, Zambia, Zambia, yes. I think that's what I've done in Africa, and then in the US once, never again. Canada, Costa Rica, Panama, Chile, and that's what I've done. And in Europe, but many European countries, I suppose: Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Italy, Switzerland, Germany. Anyway, many European countries. Maybe he's called him nature writer. He's a very famous nature writer in the UK. Not about birds necessarily, but he's a famous nature writer. And he had a really bad time in his life. You know, his mother died, and he wasn't married. He had to leave the home that he'd lived all his life, and he had to move somewhere else. And he was in his 60s, I think, and he had this huge book that massive pressure, and much bigger than any of his other books, and he was exhausted by it, and he just so depressed. He went to bed, and he just didn't want to get up, and then. He obviously got up now and then, but he just basically stayed in bed all day, depressed. And then one morning in May, he had the swifts calling. We only have one species in the UK. You have 5 or 6, but he had the swift, and they come back in early May. Okay, and when they come back, they fly around, and they're screaming, you know. And he heard the swifts, and he's lying there. And he thought, oh, the swifts are back. And that was what kick-started him back again. I've got to get up and see the swift, you see. And then gradually, it was the spring, and the birds are singing, and nature's at its best in the UK in May. And that's what restored him. And he wrote a book. He wrote a little book, which is great. It's called Nature Cure. Okay, and after that, his life turned around because he met a woman and fell in love, and anyway, he was a happy man again. So that's that's what I'm saying. I think that was his story, but I think it's exactly what you're saying. You don't have to be depressed, you just have to be, even ordinary mood. If you're feeling okay and you go out and see the birds, it makes you feel happy. Life. Oh, I think I'd like to be a white rum shaman and sing all the day. Yeah, like a beautiful song, isn't it? Yeah. No, I think I'd like to sing all day. It'd be best.